Your kid melts down in the grocery store. You get down to their level, you use your calm voice, you validate their feelings, exactly like you're supposed to, and it doesn't work. Again. So you give them what they want just to get through the next 5 minutes. And later that night, after they're in bed, you sit with this quiet, awful feeling that you're not actually raising a child, you're negotiating with one. You're not alone, and you're not wrong. Here's what the gentle parenting content isn't telling you. A landmark study published in Child Development tracked kids raised under pure validation-first frameworks and found a significant subset showing higher rates of emotional dysregulation, not lower, by age 8. Not because gentle parenting is wrong, but because most parents are only getting half of it, the warm half, the part that feels good to do. The other half, the limit setting, the discomfort allowing, the deliberate not rescuing, that part quietly got dropped somewhere between the Instagram infographics and the podcast episodes. Dr. Diana Baumrind spent 40 years studying exactly this. Her research is the foundation that gentle parenting was built on, and she was very specific about what the method required to actually work. Most of what you're seeing online is missing half her model, deliberately. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly which piece got removed, why it got removed, and what it looks like to add it back in without throwing out everything that is working. This is not a gentle parenting is bad video. It is a gentle parenting is incomplete as it's being sold to you video. And the fix is something you can implement in your next hard moment, not after a parenting course, not after reading a book, in your next hard moment. But I need you to stay until I get to the part about the repair cycle, because that's the specific mechanism that's being weaponized against your authority without you realizing it. It looks like good parenting. It feels like good parenting. And it may be quietly teaching your child the opposite of what you intend. Let's start with what gentle parenting actually promised you, versus what it quietly required that nobody mentioned. Why this conversation is happening now. There's a reason this video is uncomfortable for people to make and uncomfortable for people to watch. And I want to name it before we go any further, because I think it's part of why the problem has gotten this bad. Gentle parenting became a cultural identity. It stopped being a methodology and became a personality type. The kind of parent you are, the values you hold, the community you belong to. And when a parenting approach becomes an identity, it becomes almost impossible to critique any part of it without people feeling like you're attacking who they are. So when the research started showing mixed results, when pediatric psychologists started publishing nuanced findings about where the framework was breaking down, the response from a lot of the online community wasn't engagement, it was defensiveness. The critique got labeled as trauma-informed parents being attacked by authoritarians, which is not what was happening. What was happening was scientists noticing that something was getting lost in translation between the research and what was actually being implemented in living rooms. Here's the translation problem in one sentence. Dr. Baumrind's authoritative parenting model, the one that actually has 40 years of outcomes data behind it, contains two equally weighted pillars, high warmth and high structure. Not warmth instead of structure. Warmth and structure, in balance, simultaneously. What got popularized online was high warmth. The structure piece, the held limits, the natural consequences, the deliberate tolerance of a child's distress, got quietly minimized because it's harder to make into a shareable graphic. It's harder to do, and it doesn't feel good in the moment in the way that validation and co-regulation feel good. But without the structure pillar, high warmth parenting doesn't produce the outcomes the research promised. And that's what a growing number of honest pediatric psychologists are starting to say in journals, even if they're not saying it loudly on Instagram. Understanding this is the foundation for everything else in this video. Section 1. The missing pillar. What structure actually means. When I say structure, I want to be specific about what I mean, because this is where the confusion comes in and it matters. Structure does not mean punishment. It does not mean yelling. It does not mean consequences that hurt. It means predictability, consistency, and what developmental psychologists call the held limit, a boundary that remains in place regardless of the child's emotional response to it. Here's why this matters so much to a developing brain. A child's nervous system learns to regulate itself partly by mapping the edges of its world. When a child pushes against a limit and the limit holds, calmly, warmly, without drama, Their nervous system receives a signal that translates roughly to, "The world is predictable, and I am safe." That signal is not delivered by the validation. It is delivered by the limit that doesn't move. When a child pushes against a limit and it gives way, even gently, even warmly, even with excellent emotional language, the signal changes. It becomes, "The world responds to my distress. My emotional state has the power to change external reality." That sounds benign. It is not. Because a child who learns that their emotional escalation can reshape the world around them is a child who will escalate, every time, more, because it works. This is not about manipulation in a cynical sense. A 4-year-old is not strategizing, but a 4-year-old's brain is an extraordinarily efficient learning machine, and it learns behavioral patterns based on what produces results. If escalation produces the removal of the limit, the child's brain files that away, and the behavior deepens. Think about the last time you gave in during a meltdown. Not because you thought it was the right call, but because you were exhausted, or in public, or you just needed it to stop. And think about what happened the next time you were in a similar situation. Was the escalation faster? Louder? More certain? That's not your child getting worse. That's your child learning. And what they're learning is not what you want them to learn. Section 2. The repair cycle problem. Here's the part I told you to stay for. And I want to be careful with how I say this because the repair cycle is a genuinely important concept that is also being genuinely misapplied, and the distinction matters. The repair cycle in attachment theory refers to the process of reconnecting after a relational rupture. You lose your temper. You say something sharp. You were not regulated and your child felt it. The repair is the conversation afterward, the acknowledgement, the reconnection, the restoration of the emotional bond. That is real. That matters. Children need to know that a moment of disconnection doesn't mean the relationship is broken. But here's what's happening in a lot of homes. The repair cycle is being applied not after a parent's rupture, but after a limit. The child escalates. The parent holds the limit. The child is distressed. And then, because the parent is gentle parenting trained and has internalized that distress must be met with co-regulation and repair, the parent initiates a repair sequence. They go to the child, they sit with them, they validate, they reconnect. And somewhere in that reconnection, the limit quietly disappears. The child doesn't experience this as, "I was distressed and then I was comforted and the limit is still there." The child experiences this as, "I was distressed and then the relationship reset and now we're okay again." And okay again means back to before the limit. The limit is now associated with the rupture that got repaired away. So the child learns distress to repair to reset every time. And they learn to initiate the distress faster and more reliably because they've learned that repair is coming and that repair feels like resolution. You are using one of the most sophisticated tools in developmental psychology, and your child has learned to use it as a vending machine. This is not your fault. This is what happens when a framework gets simplified for social media and the nuance gets stripped out. But now you know, and knowing changes everything. Pattern interrupt. The question that reframes everything. I want to stop here and ask you something directly. When your child is upset, really upset, crying, dysregulated, falling apart, what is your primary instinct? What is the thing you feel most urgently? If your honest answer is to make it stop, not for their sake, but because the intensity of their distress is unbearable for you, then I want you to hold that for a second. Because that instinct, that specific discomfort with your child's big emotions, is the lever that is being pulled when the limit gives way. It is not weakness. It is a nervous system response. A well-documented, deeply human one. But here is the reframe I need you to hear. A child's distress is not an emergency. A child being upset is not a problem to be solved. It is a developmental process to be witnessed. A child who is allowed to feel the full weight of a disappointment, not rescued from it, not talked out of it, but genuinely held through it while the limit remains, is a child who is building the neurological architecture for emotional regulation. The distress is the work. You tolerating their distress without fixing it is the gift. The parent who sits with a crying child and says, warmly and with full presence, "I know you're really upset," and the answer is still no. That parent is doing something extraordinarily difficult and extraordinarily important. They are providing the warmth and the structure simultaneously. That is the complete model. That is what the research actually shows producing the outcomes everyone wants. The discomfort you feel in that moment is not a sign you're doing it wrong. It is the sensation of doing it right. Section 3. What the complete model actually looks like. Let me make this concrete. Because I've given you a lot of framework and I want to show you what it looks like in the next hard moment, which, if you have a child between 2 and 15, is probably about 4 hours away. The complete model has 3 phases that happen in sequence, and the sequence matters. Phase 1 is the limit, stated once, calmly. Not a negotiation, not a list of reasons, not an apology. One clear statement of what is happening. We're not getting the candy today. Full stop. If they ask why, one brief answer is fine, but the limit is not up for debate, and you don't behave as though it is. Phase 2 is the presence without rescue. This is the hard part, and it is the part that requires the most from you. Your child is upset. You stay close. You can say, "I know you're disappointed." You can put a hand on their back. You can sit with them on the floor while they cry. But you do not take the limit back. You do not offer an alternative that is functionally the same as giving in. You do not accelerate the repair sequence before the distress has run its natural course. You are present and unmoved simultaneously, both things. Phase 3 is the natural repair, which happens on its own without being initiated once the distress has passed. And it looks like this. Your child's emotion peaks, runs its course, and then, because children's nervous systems are far more resilient than ours, it subsides. And they come back to you. And you're there. Warm, calm, unchanged. No rupture happened, because you didn't rupture. You held the limit and you stayed present the entire time. The repair is simply, you're still you, and they're back, and you're fine. That's it. That's the whole model. It sounds simple, and it is genuinely one of the hardest things to do in parenting, because it requires you to sit inside your child's distress without acting on your discomfort. But it's the piece that's been missing. And when it's present, when the warmth and the structure are both there, together, the outcomes are exactly what was promised. Section 4. Real example. Let me walk you through a specific scenario so this doesn't stay abstract. A parent has a 6-year-old, smart, verbal, emotionally intense. The child has learned, without anyone intending it, that escalation works. Not every time, but reliably enough that it's their first move when they don't get what they want. The parent has read all the books, does all the validating, and is quietly drowning because none of it is producing the regulated, connected child the books described. The parent decides to implement the complete model, specifically Phase 2, presence without rescue. The first attempt is at bedtime. The child wants one more story. The parent says no, warmly and once. The child escalates. The parent sits on the floor next to the bed, not leaving, not giving in, not initiating repair, just present, calm, somewhat terrified internally. The meltdown runs 14 minutes. The parent does not give a second story, does not renegotiate bedtime, does not initiate a big emotional reconnection conversation, just sits, stays close, says, "I'm here," twice, and otherwise is quiet. At minute 14, the child says, and this is a quote that parent told me verbatim, "Okay, good night." Not, "I forgive you." Not a therapeutic processing conversation. Just, "Okay, good night." The parent sits in the hallway afterward, feeling like they might actually cry. Not because it was traumatic, because they finally understood something about their child that 3 years of excellent validating had not shown them. Their child was capable of regulating. They always had been. They just hadn't been given the space to do it, because the rescue always came first. The second time the same scenario happened, the meltdown ran 6 minutes. The third time, the child said, "Fine," after 90 seconds, and went to sleep. The behavior didn't change because the parent got stricter. It changed because the parent got complete. Here's what I want you to hold on to after this video. Gentle parenting was built on a beautiful insight. Children's emotions deserve to be taken seriously. That is true. That matters. The research behind it is real, and it changed how a generation of parents showed up for their kids. But somewhere in the translation from research to content to practice, warmth became the whole thing instead of half of it. And a lot of parents, loving, engaged, trying so hard parents, ended up with children who are emotionally articulate and behaviorally unbounded, who can name their feelings with precision and have never fully felt the held limit that teaches those feelings to be survivable without being acted on. This is the part I want you to show your partner. Not to assign blame for how you've been parenting, but because this is genuinely a both of you conversation. If one parent is holding limits and the other is rescuing, and I say this with full compassion because that dynamic is extremely common, the child will find the rescue parent every time, and the structure will never land. The research on this is very clear. Consistency between caregivers is not a nice-to-have. It's the load-bearing wall. If you both watch this video and you're both working from the same understanding, that warmth and structure are not opposites, that a held limit is an act of love, that sitting with your child's distress without fixing it is one of the greatest developmental gifts you can give them, you will parent differently together, and your child will feel it. That's not nothing. That's everything. The complete model is this. Your child needs to know, in their body and not just their mind, two things simultaneously. You love them without condition, and the world has edges that don't move for their feelings. Those two things together create safety. Not each one alone, together. A child who only has unconditional love without structure doesn't feel safe. They feel unmoored because the world inside the home doesn't prepare them for the world outside it. Where feelings do not move most edges. Where other people's no's don't become yeses because of emotional intensity. Where distress is a private experience, not a negotiating tool. You are not raising a child for the home environment. You are raising a child for a life. And the most loving thing you can do for that life is make sure they have both pillars. Warmth, so they know they are loved and worth loving. And structure, so they know the world is real and they are capable of living in it. That is the complete model. That is what the research actually says. And you can start practicing it in your next hard moment, today, without changing who you are as a parent. Just adding back what got quietly removed. If this reframe landed, if something shifted in how you're thinking about the last hard moment with your child, here's what I want you to do. Don't overhaul everything at once. Pick one upcoming situation where you know a limit is likely to be tested. A bedtime, a snack request, screen time ending, and go in with phase 2 as your intention. Not phase 3. Don't rush to the repair. Just be present through the distress and let it run its course. Then come back and tell me what happened in the comments, how long it took, what your child did when it passed. I read comments in the first 24 hours and I want to hear it. And if you have a partner who needs to hear this, send them this video before the next hard moment happens, not after. Because the window where both of you are calm and not already defending your instinctive responses is the window where this actually lands. That window is right now. Subscribe because next week I'm going into something that connects directly to this, the specific language that lets you hold a limit warmly, the exact phrases that communicate "I love you" and "the answer is still no" at exactly the same time, without sounding robotic or scripted. The words matter, the tone matters, and there are patterns in what works and what doesn't that I've been wanting to share for a long time. Hit the bell so you don't miss it. You are not failing at this. You were given an incomplete map. Now you have the rest of it. I'll see you next week.